It's another Locked On crossover. We have two top 25 teams facing off in Austin this weekend, the Texas Longhorns and the Kansas Jayhawks. I am Jonathan Davis, host of Locked On Longhorns, and he is Derek Johnson, host of Locked On Jayhawks, ready to preview what could be an offensive explosion this weekend in DKR. And Derek, we know really for the last decade, this game has been used, for trolls on Twitter, right? Because two of, the biggest wins in Kansas program history have come against the Longhorns, right? In some dark moments for this program under Charlie Strong in the first year for Steve Sarkisian, going 5-7. But now, for the first time in maybe ever, we're actually talking about this game for real football reasons because Texas has a really good football team and Kansas has a really good football team. And I think going into this game, we have a very interesting quarterback matchup, right? Quinn Ewers and Jalon Daniels. Jalon Daniels picked to be the preseason Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. Now, he missed the first game, but since then, he's been balling. 779 total yards and 5 touchdowns. So, Derek, I want to ask you, this Kansas team is undefeated. Jalon Daniels, one of the biggest reasons why. What does he mean to this football team and to this program?
Oh, he's everything. And you see it. Jason Bean, who's the backup quarterback, is one of the best backup quarterbacks in the Big 12. And he filled in admirably when he was hurt last year. But you just see the differences of having a guy versus having the guy. And that's what you get with Jalon Daniels. He's an electric runner. His offense coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki, has said that he has the vision of a running back. He runs tough like a running back. He's got a live wire arm. He's not the tallest guy in the world, but you'll see some deep ball throws and some, rifled in throws when he has to fit it into a window. He's mobile. He's calm. He's cool. He's collected. He's the guy everybody wants to be around. He's a great leader. He's super, he embraces everyone, but he's got like a very lively personality about him whenever you talk to him. And, it was interesting because you go back to 2021, he made his first start that year in his second year of college against Texas. And that was the game in Austin that they won. And that was kind of the start of this for him. And he actually was number one that year in 2021 in total QBR in the Big 12. If he would have qualified, obviously it was too small of a sample with 3 games. And it was kind of like, okay, what do you got here? Then you go into 2022 and he's like popping up as like an early Heisman watch. Who knows how real that would have been through the first 5 weeks of the season, but early in the year he was when they were 5-0, and then he obviously gets injured, but he was number one in the Big 12 in total QBR again. And now you go to this year, right now he's number 3. Dylan Gabriel's 1, which they haven't really played anyone, so we'll see where that goes. Quinn Ewers is number 2, and Jalon Daniels is number 3. So yeah, I think this is going to be an outstanding quarterback matchup, and that's why there should be a lot of points.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be high flying on Saturday. I expect both teams to go over 30 points, but we'll pick the game a little bit later, right? And so Jalon Daniels definitely means a lot to this team. Sticking with the offense, because this is a team right now that's averaging 37.8 points per game. Devin Neal at running back, maybe one of the more underrated players in the country when you're talking about offensive superstars, 539 total yards thus far and 6 touchdowns. Just talk about Devin Neal, the player, and how do you expect him to be utilized on Saturday against a ferocious Texas defense?
Well, in the Nevada game in week 3, he was dealing with some sort of injury that they didn't disclose what it was, but it kind of kept him free from a few practices. So like there have been certain times throughout his career where he's been nicked up and they've had to kind of limit his carries. Daniel Highshaw, you'll see get a ton of carries as well. And there have been games where both of them will get like 12 to 14 carries and be in the same range. So I do think because this is a road game against top 25 opponent, Governor's off in that standpoint where like maybe you could see him get 20 carries. He had a game last year against Oklahoma State where he had 30-something touches between catches and receptions, and he had almost 300 total yards. Not saying that he's going to have that production, but I could see this being more of a workhorse game for him. Certainly, you would think Kansas wants to control with the ball. As good of an offense as they are, they're not a fast-paced offense. They'll get 55 to 60 plays in a game. They'll control the clock if they need to, and I think going against a tough Texas offense, that's going to rely on the running backs with Devin Neal. So they've used him a lot more in the passing game this year, but for the most part, he's just got great vision. Unbelievable one-cut runner. He's got good speed in the open field. He's got a good stiff arm. I think he's going to be playing in the NFL as soon as next year. I'm really high on what he is and how he is as a runner. Obviously, last year they weren't really able to get anything going against Texas in the game that was in Lawrence. But yeah, man, Devin Neal, if they can get him going, if they can get him to that second level, he can make guys miss. The question for me becomes what the KU offensive line does, because when you look at the KU offensive line, they've been great this year. Pro Football Focus has them ranked as number 6 in the country in pass blocking grade, number 3 in the country in run blocking grade. But what do we know about the Texas defense so far? That defensive line has been, I was so impressed with the Texas defensive line against Alabama. How much, when you think about that, because I do think that's going to be a key, Kansas running the ball. When you go back to the Alabama game, obviously the Alabama offense hasn't lit up the scoreboard since then. Like, how much do you take away from that Alabama game of what the defensive line looked like and how dominant of a unit you think that can be versus being like, well, maybe we have some questions against Alabama?
Yeah, no. So when I look at the defensive line, I go back to last year, right? Where you look at that defense that held, Alabama, who averaged over, I think maybe close to 40 points a game, held them to 20. And then you look at that defense in that game against TCU, who was number 4 in the country at the time, and held them to 17 points. So they've shown the ability last year in the biggest games to rise to the occasion. And I think this year in all 4 games, they've been the best unit on the field. And when you look at that Alabama game, for 3 years, Steve Sarkisian has been trying to prepare this team to be able to play at the highest level and be able to win at a high level in the SEC, especially in the trenches. And I think the Alabama game, really both years, but this year especially because you came out with the victory, validated that you are ready to play at the highest level and win in the trenches. And week in and week out, this defensive line is showing that they can dominate at a high level. And what I love so much is you have star power, starting on that defensive line that, do such a good job of getting to the quarterback and stopping the run. But then when you bring in, that second rotation, that second wave of guys, when you bring in true freshmen on that defensive line or on the defense period, there's really no drop off. And this defense has just been amazing for, Texas this year. So I take a lot from it, right? But I take a lot from their game against Wyoming. That's a good football team. I take a lot from their game against Rice. That's a good football team. And then this last week, the way that they shut down Baylor and held them without a touchdown. And, trust me, they were trying to score into the final whistle. So, this Texas defense is, hellacious, I will say, but I still think, we're going to see somewhat of an offensive showdown this weekend in Austin. I think this Kansas offense is just a little too much to stop. But, we'll see how it goes, right? We could talk all day, and preview it, but they got to play on the field on Saturday. But I want to know, what do you and the, Kansas Jayhawk fans want to know about this Texas offense going into the game on Saturday?
Well, I guess the big question for me is with Quinn Ewers, last year, kind of an up and down year. I know there was so much made about like the footwork, right? So far this year, he's been awesome. I think 12 total touchdowns, no interceptions so far this year. How much though are you buying into Quinn Ewers being a dude versus he's a game manager that just has elite talent at seemingly every position around him?
Yeah, so you talked about the inconsistency last year, right? Only completing 58% of his passes. And, you saw the big games against Alabama and Oklahoma, and you love that against the biggest competition. But then there was a 6-game stretch where he looked really human. At times it looked like he had never played football before. And then, he came back and had a pretty good performance against Wyoming, albeit in a loss. And I think this year it's been inconsistent, right? I think he was decent against Rice. I think he was really, really good against Bama. I think he was not good at all, against Wyoming. And then he came back and had a really strong performance against Baylor. So, you're looking for that consistency at this point from Quinn Ewers. I think we've seen some really high highs at his time at Texas, and I think we've seen some pretty questionable lows, during his time at Texas, but it seems like he's starting to figure it out. I think that Baylor game was a huge step for his confidence, especially in an environment like that on the road, even though the Baylor football team didn't show up. So, we'll see what he does on Saturday against Kansas. But, I think, this will be the first time in a while that we see him stack 2 really good performances together in a row. And I think that he's going to have a big game on Saturday, especially going into this game with another alpha on the sideline and Jalon Daniels, across from him. So, I think the Quinn Ewers experience thus far has been a little inconsistent. Like I said, we've seen him play at the highest level in the biggest moments, but then we've also seen some games where it felt like he played down to the competition or just didn't take, the level of competition too seriously. Maybe that's what happened in that Wyoming game. But, I think we'll see the best version of Quinn Ewers this weekend against Kansas.
Yeah, and I was looking at some of the offensive line, the pressure numbers, and I think I saw Quinn Ewers like a 65 passer rating so far this year, limited sample when he's under pressure. But the problem is you can't really get him under pressure if the offensive line is blocking their tail off, which they have so far. Kansas had 15 pressures as a defense last week against BYU. Texas has given up less than that all season long. So why has this offensive line? Because it felt like for the longest time, Texas was unable to produce offensive line players into the NFL as much as you think they should, right? I mean, there were a few guys here or there. What has been different about this offensive line? Why have they been so good?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with bringing in Kyle Flood, and coming in with a different mentality that we want to win games in the trenches, right? When Steve Sarkisian came in, he talked about having more receivers, than scholarship offensive linemen. That's how the team was built. That's probably why the team has struggled. So they really invested in that unit. Then you talk about bringing in talent, right? Kelvin Banks, a freshman All-American. He will probably be, a top 10 pick in that 2025 NFL draft. You're bringing in blue chip offensive linemen year in and year out. And then you look at the development, right? Guys like Jake Majors, Hayden Connor, and Christian Jones, who are left over from the Tom Herman era, really have shown development and have played at a high level at the University of Texas. And then you talk about the continuity on the offensive line, which means a great deal for their performance on the field, right? The same 5 offensive linemen that started last year are back this year, and 4 or 5 of them are starting. 5 of them have played, right? That started last year, have played a significant role for this Texas football team. So I think you look at bringing in Kyle Flood and really putting, an emphasis on that position. You start to bring in more talented players at that position. And then you have continuity, bringing those players back year after year, having them develop, and then putting the emphasis on winning games like that in the trenches with that offensive line. I think that's been why they've been so good, right? So we talked about, this offensive line and holding up against this Kansas defense. A lot of people say that the Kansas defense may be the weakness of this undefeated football team. So a quick word from our sponsors, and then we're going to talk about, what this Kansas defense needs to do to slow down this Texas offense on Saturday. This Locked On crossover is brought to you by FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the National Football League. Really quick, Derek, I got to ask you, because you're in Kansas, are you a Kansas City Chiefs fan? And what are your thoughts on Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift? Please just give it to us really quickly, because we just have to know. It's the hottest topic in the world right now for whatever reason. So I'm asking you.
Yeah, I am a Kansas City Chiefs fan, and it's been just a whirlwind out here. We actually, there was a rumor going on this week. I don't know the truth to it. I was told by multiple people that I do trust, but I don't know. We'll see. That Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce were actually in Lawrence earlier this week having lunch at a local brewery, and then they were escorted out through some tunnel areas and stayed at a local hotel. Again, it was just a rumor. I don't know if it's true or not. Funny enough, Taylor Swift actually loves the city of Lawrence. Her best friend, when she was back around that age, went to KU, and she would come out to KU a few times. There are videos of her being like, my perfect day would be spending a day with my best friend in Lawrence, Kansas and stuff. So you can actually look that stuff up. It's kind of funny. So I don't know, maybe that's good omens for KU this weekend, but yeah, very, very funny and interesting. And certainly Sunday Night Football this weekend is going to have high ratings for reasons you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, we got breaking news for the Swifties, on the podcast. They may or may not have been in Lawrence. And then, you already, spoke on the other breaking news that she will be at the, Chiefs-Jets game on Sunday. I have the Chiefs defense in fantasy. They did well against the Bears. Hopefully they show up and show out for Taylor Swift against the Jets on Sunday. We're back to talking about Texas, Kansas, and we've talked about 2 very explosive offenses, and we know that Jalon Daniels and Devin Neal are going to do everything they can to try to carry this Kansas team to victory on Saturday. But many people are saying that, Kansas is undefeated right now, but this defense may be the unit that holds them back, right? If you can beat this Kansas team, it's because you can outscore them and make plays on this defense. What do you think they need to do on Saturday? What needs to be the game plan to go into DKR and get the upset this weekend?
Have to be able to stop the run on early downs, get them into passing situations where your defensive ends can pin their ear backs. The defensive ends have been really good. They rotate about 6 guys on that defensive end group, and a lot of them have a lot of talent. Austin Booker, former Minnesota transfer, he's like 6'6", 245, unbelievable get off the ball. Jeremy Robinson's a real good player as well, and they'll rotate some other players that have some flash and talent too. If they can get into those situations, maybe you can get some pressure on Quinn Ewers. Maybe you can dial up some blitzes. And that was the thing last year. Texas ran for over 400 yards against Kansas a year ago. I asked at a press conference, the defensive coordinator this week for Kansas, he gave up over 400 yards. Is that going to serve as motivation? And he started to cut me off and he goes, 427. Yeah, we know. So it very much is going to be used as motivation. Now, it's one thing to be motivated. It's another thing to be able to perform and execute and going up against a very talented team, right? But Jonathan Brooks, who was the third string running back last year, even behind Bijan and Roschon Johnson, he still had over 100 yards against Kansas a year ago, even as the third string. So you have to be able to stop the run. And so far under the Lance Leipold era in Kansas. So going back to the beginning of 2021, Kansas is 10-0 when their opposition runs for 4.5 yards per carry or less. They are 2-17 when they run for more. One of those wins was actually 2021 in Austin, funny enough. But that's the key for Kansas. You have to be able to slow down the running game because you already have enough with the Texas passing game and all the weapons they have and trying to stop Jatavion Sanders and Xavier Worthy and Quinn Ewers and the offensive line. It's going to be hard enough. If you're giving up a running game too, it's going to be too much.
Yeah, we'll see. It's definitely going to be tough for the Kansas defense, and we'll see if they can rise to the occasion. But there are some big-time playmakers on the defense. They may not be the best unit as a whole, but they're certainly opportunistic. So talk about some players that could be some X factors for this Kansas defense this weekend.
Yeah, so I mentioned Austin Booker, a really good pass rusher, Jeremy Robinson at the other end. If you're looking to stop the run, Devin Phillips is a wide-bodied defensive tackle. I mean, the dude fills up a door frame. They brought him in from Colorado State. He's a sixth-year senior. He's done a really good job plugging up the run. The linebacker spot's kind of interesting. Rich Miller's the captain of the defense, and he's the older player. The guy who will make flash plays, though, is J.B. Brown. Miller's more of the dependable guy. Brown's a transfer they brought over from Bowling Green. And, he had a really high pro football focus grade at Bowling Green, but limited snaps in the MAC. He's come over and he's one of the team's best athletes. Runs like a deer. He's one of the strongest guys in the program. They've lined him up some even at defensive end on pass rushing situations. He will come up and hit you. He's one of the hardest hitters on the team. So certainly someone to watch. Cornell Wheeler, we saw him get a bunch of snaps last week with another linebacker injured. He's a former Michigan transfer at the linebacker spot. And then the secondary is loaded with experience. They brought back their top 3 corners and their top 3 safeties from a year ago. Kobe Bryant was a first-team All-Big 12 performer from last year. He's been elite on the outside so far this year. That was kind of a question for us in the offseason. Could he go from first-team All-Big 12 to the next step, which would be, All-American? So far this year, he's been targeted 9 times. He's only given up 28 yards, and he has 2 interceptions. That's unbelievable numbers for Kobe Bryant so far this year. Now, how much, Texas has multiple receivers. They could go against him. I don't know if he's going to travel the field with Xavier Worthy or if he's just going to stay on one side. I kind of think he's just going to stay on one side, so we'll see. But those would be the players to watch. What about the flip side for you? Who are the offensive players to watch for Texas?
Yeah, offensive. I think that they're going to try to get Xavier Worthy going. They're going to start off in the quick game and then, try to take their opportunities down the field with him late. You mentioned Jonathan Brooks. He's really came on late. And, I think that we've realized as talented as we are in the wide receiver room, we're still really dangerous in 12 personnel. So I think you'll see a lot of power run with Jonathan Brooks, true freshman Cedric Baxter, really trying to get that running game going. And I liked what they did with JT Sanders last week, the tight end, right? You're so focused on those receivers on the outside. You're so focused on stopping the run. And then now you got tight ends leaking out and you don't know what to do with them, right? You don't know if you're going to put a linebacker on them or a safety on them. You just don't know what to do. Right. And so I think JT Sanders has a really big game this week. So if I'm looking for, I don't want to say offensive, wild cards because these are players that, pretty much show up week in and week out. I think Xavier Worthy, JT Sanders, and Jonathan Brooks have really big days for the Texas Longhorns this weekend. But I want to move the conversation from the field to the coaching staff, right? I want to talk about Lance Leipold. Did I get his name right?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, Lance Leipold a little bit in this program because when we talk about Kansas, we're so used to talking about Bill Self and basketball, right? But he has really inserted, Kansas into the football conversation. And when you look at 2021, you go 2-10, but you have the big win over Texas on the road, right? And then last year, you go 6-7. You deal with some injuries and some inconsistency at the quarterback position. This year, Kansas is 4-0. What do you think the ceiling is for this program, and what is the pulse around the fan base about the job Lance Leipold has done? Do you think this team can get to 8 wins? Do you think this can be a 10-win program? Do you think this could be a college football playoff type program? What do you think the true ceiling for Kansas is under Lance Leipold?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about the future, like beyond this year, moving forward as you're building, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving for the SEC, I really do feel like it is wide open for who that school is going to. I felt like everybody just assumed that when Texas and Oklahoma announced they were leaving, they were like, okay, who's going to be the school that's going to dominate the conference? And I felt like the most popular answer was Oklahoma State. And now all of a sudden they're having a bad year, right? To where it's like, it's wide open. And maybe, you'd favor TCU because they're going to be able to recruit the Dallas area. And I don't know, maybe UCF even being able to recruit Florida, like they'll be up there. Who knows? I just feel like it's going to be wide open. So I don't know. Sky's, I guess, the limit on what you can do from that standpoint. When you're looking at this year's team, you go back to last year, they were a 6-win team, but prior to Jalon Daniels being injured, they were 5-0, and you lose by 7 points to TCU in a game where you missed a field goal, you fumbled at the 1-yard line, and you had kind of a borderline call on a 4th and 10 at their 35-yard line with like 2 minutes left when you were going in to try to, score a touchdown. And they said after the game they would have gone for 2 if they would have got the touchdown. Who knows how that would have affected college football last year. But, if you just said coming into the year, which this is what happened for Kansas, you had a 6-win team that returned 10 of 11 starters on offense, that returned 7 starters on defense, that brought in a bunch of transfers, returned every coach, Lance Leipold, coordinators, every position coach. And you just put duct tape over the name Kansas and said, that's any other school. It wasn't that much different than what Oklahoma was doing, right? And Oklahoma's being picked as a top 25 team. That hype wasn't there for Kansas. And I think understandably so, because typically you're going to go with, history and what trends tell us. And the trends weren't there for Kansas. So I understand why it happened. But I think from that standpoint, the sky was the limit. And I kind of went into the offseason going, yeah, I think 7 or 8 wins, that's doable for this team. And I think after the way they've looked over Illinois and BYU, and with how the Big 12 has been kind of wide open, like Texas has been great to start. Oklahoma's defense and everything has looked great. Haven't seen the schedule. I still think Kansas State's a really good team, but like outside of that, it's kind of wide open. So why can't you win 8 or 9 games this year? And I think that's the big thing this week for Kansas. You can have a good loss. If Kansas loses this game by 10 points, they lose this game by 7 points, you might come out of the game saying, man, maybe we can win 9 games. Maybe we can even contend to be in the Big 12 championship game and replay Texas if we can get Oklahoma at home in a couple weeks for homecoming. And, Kansas State ends up being a team you play at home too. So, yeah, I think the sky is kind of the limit, and the Big 12 feels outside of Texas kind of wide open to me.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, when I said, 10-win program and college football playoff, I was talking about eventually under Lance Leipold.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want anybody in the comments arguing with me saying Kansas not going to the college football playoff this year, right? You know what I mean? I'm just talking about eventually. All right, a quick word from our sponsors. We're going to answer the $1 million questions: who wins and who covers. All right, Derek, I'm looking at this line from FanDuel, and it's pretty hefty. All right, I don't know who came up with it, but obviously the people in Vegas are smarter than me. That's why they have all that money in all those tall buildings, right? That's why Usher has a residency there, right? Because so many people are bad at gambling, right? Texas is favored by 16.5 points over Kansas. We know what happened the last time these two teams faced off in DKR. Who wins this game and who covers?
So I'm going to go Texas wins the game. I have questions about how they're going to slow them down. I do think Kansas covers. I think they can be feisty enough. If I'm going with official score prediction, I'm going 42-28 with Texas in front. That would give you Kansas, if it's anything 14.5 or higher, which right now it's 16.5, you're covered there. That would also give me the over, because the over under sitting in the low 60s, get you to 70. I like the over on that one. By the way, if you are on FanDuel, they have a 50% same game parlay boost with 3+ legs if you're here in Kansas. So you can play some action on that. If you want a fun touchdown score, I think you can get good odds on Daniel Highshaw or LJ Arnold if you're looking into that.
Okay, we got some gems for you on the betting side. I think Texas wins this game. We talked about the defense. I think they can be opportunistic and may make a few plays, but ultimately I just don't think they can hold up against this Texas offense over the course of 60 minutes. And we've talked about how this Texas defense is just flying right now, and they did a really good job against Jalen Milroe. I think Jalon Daniels is a different level of quarterback right now, but I still think they'll do a really good job of limiting him, right? He'll make some plays, but I don't think they'll let him, dominate in the run game. And I think for the most part, they'll be tough with that pass rush, limited him a little bit in the passing game. And we've seen what they're able to do with their, Russian defense. So it'll be interesting to see who wins that battle, between the offensive line, Devin Neal, and the defense and that front seven. But I think ultimately the Texas defense is just too tough, and, they're playing at too high of a level right now. So, I think both teams get over 30. I think my score prediction a little bit closer than yours. I got 41-34 and a thriller, 2:30 this weekend on Saturday. So I got Texas winning. I got Kansas covering. Now, I will say I picked Baylor to cover last week, and we see how wrong I was about that. So hopefully, you know what I mean, I'm wrong again, right? But I think Kansas covers. Texas wins 41-34. I think we see a thriller this weekend in Austin between Texas and Kansas. Derek, as we get out of here, for Longhorn fans, if they ever, for any reason, just want to listen to, Kansas content, and I think it's messed up, that Kansas does not have to come to the Moody Center this year in basketball, but we'll talk about that a little bit later, right? Let them know where they can find you, Derek.
Yeah, at D Johnson Radio on Twitter, Locked On Jayhawks. You can also tune in to me Monday through Friday, 3 to 6 p.m. on KLWN in Lawrence with Rock Chalk Sports Talk.
And I'm Jonathan Davis, Locked On Longhorns, Locked On Horns on Twitter. John Ball. That's the personal Twitter, right? Hook 'em and peace. Let's have fun on Saturday.